Politics. The first week of Parliament for the year was marred by resignations and rivalries. For more, I'm now joined by Ben Oquist from the Australia Institute and Renee Gorman from the Institute of Public Affairs. Good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks Renee.
Ben, we'll start with you. Firstly, let's talk about the National Party. What do you make of the leadership challenge this week by Barnaby Joyce?
Well, there's big divisions in the National Party, and Barnaby Joyce is going to keep kicking. He has already signalled that he's still not happy with the direction of the National Parties. There's threats to cross the floor. I've heard him outside it again today, spruiking loudly the benefits of coal, more loudly than Scott Morrison is championing the benefits of coal these days. I think ultimately climate change is dividing the National Party. Climate change is the defining issue of our age, and climate change will define politics and political parties in how they respond. And ultimately, if the National Party wing that's going to be fervently pro-coal has its way, that'll be not only climate vandalism, economic vandalism, renewables are cheaper and more reliable, but it'll also be political vandalism for the National Party, because their constituency is moving on as well. And as politics and all political parties grapple with climate change, it's going to be those parties that seize the economic opportunities that will seize the political opportunities. And I think that's the real long-term threat to the National Party and other political parties that don't reconcile with the climate crisis, which is going to lead to all sorts of economic crises unless we take hold of it.
Focusing on obviously the week that has been, Renee, Barnaby Joyce is now threatening to lead a group of MPs across the floor on legislation that he doesn't agree with. We're now in the second week. The Nationals still in the spotlight.
I definitely think that the Nationals are still in the spotlight. The Nationals are in the spotlight because this decision and the Nationals' future decision really is a game of survival. The Nationals had a real choice when they went into that party room, and I do agree with Ben that climate change was the main issue that that choice revolved around. And the Nationals had a choice between keeping McCormack and continuing to follow the Liberals and prioritising unrealistic Paris targets, or they had a choice of taking another route and going against these unrealistic targets and prioritising cheaper electricity and industry. In other words, the Nationals had a choice between being loyal to their friends in Canberra or being loyal to their constituency. And it's really disappointing to see that the Nationals, a majority of them, chose the first option, especially when we've seen what happens when the Nationals fail to represent their base. So in New South Wales state politics, the continuing disregard for the national base and their wants and needs has left a void, and that void is starting to be filled by minor parties. So in my opinion, if the Nationals don't start acting like Nationals, they're going to cease to be.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting this week to see how this all pans out. Ben, also this week, Richard Di Natale, he resigned as Greens leader. Adam Bandt now in charge. A new era for the Greens party, would you say?
Sorry, I just missed that, Danica.
So just talking about the Greens this week, of course, we saw the resignation of Richard Di Natale as leader. Adam Bandt is now in charge. Would you say this is now a new era, I guess, going forward for the party?
It is, and it no doubt will bring new energy to the Greens, as well as every new leader did. Richard Di Natale's done a good job as leader. He's seen the Greens through 2 elections, and the Greens have held their own. Adam Bandt does bring a new style of leadership, though, and a new energy, as I said. Being in the House of Representatives is going to bring big challenges, but bring opportunities. Challenges because the Greens have, by and large, been in the Senate. That's where the vast majority of their MPs and their party room comes from, and have got their relevance from being a balance of power Senate party often. So it's a challenge for Adam not to be in that chamber. But on the other hand, he's in the chamber of government where the Prime Minister is, and that's where a lot more of the media focus is, of course, and ultimately where governments live and die. And so Adam being on that floor of that Parliament means that's a big opportunity for the Greens to bring that new energy into that house where most of attention is focused. He does have the challenge of, I think, kind of knitting together two big potential constituencies. There's a lot of small L Liberals, and we've seen those Liberals speaking out of the party room that are concerned about climate change. And then there's the kind of more left wing of the Labor Party view and electorate. And Adam's challenge, I think, is to stitch those two constituencies together. And if he can do that in an era of climate crisis, there's big potential upsides for the Greens, but plenty of challenges ahead too.
And your thoughts on this, Renee, about new life into the party, but also a number of challenges ahead?
Yeah, well, I think it's only suitable that the Greens have a leader from inner city Melbourne, because that seems to be the only constituency that they really represent. I also notice, as many people have before me, that the Greens, who claim to be the champions of diversity, have replaced one bespectacled middle-aged man with another bespectacled middle-aged man. But there has been concerns that Adam Bandt is going to be perhaps a more radical leader. But personally, I'm open for a little bit more transparency for the Greens. So the Greens have been called in the past the watermelon party for being green on the outside and red in the middle. But now that they have a leader who has a PhD in Marxist ideology, it looks like they might be a little bit more of a strawberry going into the future.
I like the analogy of fruit, Renee. Moving on now, Ben, an inquiry into the Angus Taylor doctored document saga has now been finalised without any finding of criminality. How do you think that this whole saga has been handled?
Well, two things here. The still big question is, what was Angus Taylor doing as a cabinet minister, using his resources, his energy, to go and attack Clover Moore? That was a massive political mistake from Angus Taylor to be attacking a Lord Mayor of Sydney, representing a big jurisdiction, of course, Sydney, and it's an important council, and they've taken some good stances on climate change. They've moved their net zero target from 2050 to 2040, something that this federal government should be doing, as countries and cities around the world are doing. But really, what was Angus Taylor doing, using his resources to attack a Lord Mayor rather than his political opponents here in Canberra? But more broadly, the really worrying thing is that there seems to be no consequence for the forging or the use of forged documents. And the police have said they're not going to investigate it. Now, if ever there was a time for a federal integrity commission, a federal anti-corruption watchdog, it is now. The government has promised a federal anti-corruption watchdog back in 2018. Here we are in 2020 without one. We have a crisis in our politics, a crisis in our faith in democracy even now, and one of those reasons is because people don't think we've got enough integrity in our politics, and this shows that we don't have the necessary checks and balances. If the police aren't going to investigate forged documents, we need a federal anti-corruption watchdog in teeth to help address the crisis of trust in politics, which is bleeding to a loss of faith in democracy. This Angus Taylor affair is a clarion call for a strong federal anti-corruption watchdog with teeth.
Renee, your thoughts? Do you think, as Ben said, this is now at a crisis point?
Yes, I do think we're at a crisis point, but for different reasons. So when it comes to this case with Angus Taylor, I do think we need to fall into the old standard of innocent until proven guilty, and the police force have said that they have found no real evidence of a forgery. And I do think the allegations from Clover Moore that this is somehow evidence that the New South Wales police force is not independent are a little bit outrageous, especially when you consider who referred the New South Wales police force to investigate this. And I am talking, of course, of Mark Dreyfus, who has recently been caught, thanks to an FOI from the Institute of Public Affairs, using his political sway to bully bureaucrats into targeting his political opponents. And I'm, of course, talking about CPAC and Tony Abbott. We are at a crisis point, but I think the FOI and what happened with CPAC is much more concerning than this case with Angus Taylor.
All right, final word from both of you. Of course, this week the Prime Minister announced that a commissioner will be appointed to investigate veteran suicide. Ben, it's not a royal commission, as various groups, including Labor, had been calling for late last year, but the commissioner will have all the powers of a royal commissioner. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's a good move. Congratulations to the government on setting this up. Yes, a Royal Commission would have been better and bigger and probably would have led to the development of this office, but let's not take away from the fact that the government's done this. Good on them. Good on them also for putting Darren Chester back into Cabinet as Minister for Veterans Affairs. That means there's a Minister for Veterans Affairs at the Cabinet table. Two good decisions by the government. One thing I think they mishandled slightly is not involving crossbench Senator Jackie Lambie a little bit more in this announcement. It's been one of her passions in the Parliament, the pursuing of a Royal Commission. It's been one of the things that she's most prosecuted in the Senate, and has pursued the government and has sought information from them and sought results. And if I was the government looking to keep the key crossbencher in the Senate on side, I would have at least involved Senator Lambie in the decision somewhat, and in the planning for the announcement and the execution of it.
And Renee, your thoughts on this week's announcement? Is it a welcome? It's finally happening?
Yeah, I do agree with Ben that I think that this is definitely a positive move in the right direction. Since 2001, 400 military personnel have taken their own lives, and that is just a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. And even though I don't come from a military background myself or a military family, I do come from a family with a lot of mental illness. And I can say from personal experience that one of the main issues is stigma. When a family has the tragedy of, say, cancer, they are surrounded by support, as they should be. But when it comes to mental health, there is still a stigma. Even as a young child, I knew that I wasn't supposed to talk about what was going on at home. And I really hope that this investigation into military suicides also opens up a broader discussion in Australia about the male suicide rate. So 75% of suicides are men, and suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. We have a real problem in our culture when so many of our young men can't see their value.
Yeah, well said, absolutely. Renee Gorman and Ben Oquist, appreciate your time. Thank you to both of you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And if you or anyone you know is feeling distressed, you can call